Well, hey everybody, it is Romania Black, and we are on episode 7 of Dororo, and nothing happened last week, right? Last week was so sad. Last week was so horrible. You knew that Mariko was gonna die. You just knew it, but the heartbreak. The heartbreak. And from going to see Hyakkimaru with a smile on his face and falling in love with her to seeing it just crushed, taken away was so gut wrenching. And just the cathartic end of last week's episode where you have poor Dororo and Hyakkimaru just kind of like stumbling off into the distance, like, I guess this is what we'll do. It was like, oh my God, it was so heartbreaking, just heartbreaking. I was like, so yeah, there's that. But I'm super excited to see what will end up happening with the rest of this season moving forward, because it's like, well, they got to do something, right? So we're trekking along our way. I'm curious to see what adventure we'll go on next, but the last two-parter that we had over the last couple weeks were really, really good. I absolutely love those episodes, so I'm excited to see what we will get moving forward. But I definitely have enjoyed reading everyone's comments. I don't have any comments that necessarily stand out because most everybody has said stuff that we've talked about in the episodes, but I appreciate everyone's comments, and I hope you all keep commenting because I love hearing your thoughts. I know Moomin has recommended like a movie, and there's been people talk about like all of the different comparisons. There's been some people talk about their comparisons to Berserk, which is neat. I know that I Swallow Apple Seeds talked about how the storyboard director for episode 3 was the same as some of the Attack on Titan episodes, so that kind of made sense. So yeah. But I want to give a quick shout out over to our philanthropy tier over on Patreon to thank them so much for all of their support, especially helping me keep my subscription for this streaming service up so that I can keep watching this show. So a special shout out to Alex Cornejo, to Anime Annie, to Be Happy, to Bryant Reed, to Dana, to Damage3245, to Danny Don Mai, to Devorin, to Destiny Marie, to Danger Zone, to Eric Ichu, Faisho, Ghostly Turnip, El Freya, Liam Poles, Lyndon, Matthew Palfiniere, Murphew, Maroni W, Alexandra Q, as well as Nicholas, Shimoyama, Sunspots, Trails, Translucent, Min, as well as I Alone Am the Bitchless One, and Nancy Mass Art. Thank you all so much for your support and your consideration and all of your kind words and comments. I really appreciate it. All of my love. So it's freezing outside. My home is considerably warmer than outside, but it's like 20 degrees outside, which Fahrenheit, so, whatever. But still, it's the coldest it's been in a while. And so I'm like, I want to warm up. And I'm pretty excited to do that with Dororo. So with that being said, we're not going to waste any more time. I'm so curious to see what the next arc is going to be and how soon are we going to get connected to Tahomaru. How's that going to work? We'll just have to see. But we're going to get started with episode 7 of Dororo. And we're going to do that here in 3, 2, 1. And let's go. That was a very straightforward episode. That felt like a great palate cleanser. That was a good palate cleanser from what we just experienced. So I feel like after having... that episode was really good for a number of reasons, honestly. I think one of the good reasons was it was a little bit more simple, lighthearted, as lighthearted as, people nearly being, prevented from love and killed can be. But it actually ended up being a lot more lighthearted than I thought it was going to go down. I thought that the route that this episode was going to go down was going to be a lot darker. So I'm glad for that. But also, this episode was kind of really good because it needed to happen after we just got done with that episode involving Hyakkimaru nearly becoming a monster himself. And so I wanted to talk about that because throughout the episode, I kept thinking like, oh, that's a really good point. Oh, the show's doing a really cool thing with that. And the one thing I like about Dororo is that it can be very straightforward and like, here's the theme, here's the message. We're not going to try to like make it anything that it's not. It is what it is. But then there are other times where the show is really subtle and kind of just gives you this little message and you're like, oh, that's what you're doing. Okay. And this episode was one of those episodes. And so I wanted to kind of talk about it with y'all. But this guy Yajiro, he is down to clown with some monsters. On the one hand, I wanted to joke about it because I'm reading Scumvillain Self-Saving System on Mondays on my channel, and one of the characters in it, he keeps going on and on and on about how much he loves the monsters of this world, and he loves the world building monsters and everything. We've been joking in this Discord server that he's basically, pardon my language, but basically a monster fucker. So when Yajiro was like, I am totally fine with going with you, ma'am, I was like, he is down. And then when he saw her in her spider form, not even deterred, not even distracted, not even worried, he was like, oh, we can work with this. It's kind of refreshing to see this very open-minded guy that's like, I'm down for whatever. And it's like, good for him. Good for him. I'm glad he gets to go with her. That's great. That I'm sure he'll be fine and they'll have lots of adventures. I want to go watch a spin-off series of them. Can we have that? I would watch that in a heartbeat. So yeah, I think one of the most frustrating aspects about the show, and not frustrating in a bad way, but it's frustrating because Hyakkimaru, he can speak, but he is choosing not to. And on the one hand, I kind of like that. I like it. It feels very natural, even though he's regained the option to speak. The last time he spoke was just saying the name of the woman he loved as she died in his arms, and her family and home burned and was covered in blood around them. So, I could understand why he wouldn't just want to start a rousing conversation after that. But also, it almost gives reverence to him speaking. Like, him speaking is something that is reserved for very important moments, right? And he's one of those characters that when he does talk, you need to listen. And that's kind of what Dororo gets mad at him by. He's like, are you listening to what I'm saying? And is some of it going in his ear and out the other? Probably, because Dororo's like this all the time. He's like me doing a reaction and discussion all the time. How he hasn't lost his voice, we don't know. But I like that also it could point to the fact that Hyakkimaru is trying to kind of meditate on what's happened and be like, okay, what do I do now? What does this mean for me? I would argue throughout this episode, he's kind of contemplating some things and thinking about some things. And we're going to talk about that as we go. But him being quiet is kind of frustrating for us, the audience, because we want to hear him talk. We want to know what he's thinking. We don't get any insight into his brain and what Hyakkimaru is thinking about. So anytime we could get a reaction from him or get any, conversation from him would be really great. But the show is playing its cards very close to the chest, which I like, because episode 1 of the 1960s version that I watched, he was just talking up a storm. And I was like, oh, okay, well, this is different. But I like the way that it's done here. And Dororo talks enough for both of them. So, man, hunger is a constant theme in this episode. And I'm going to be honest, I ate lunch like an hour ago, but I was really hungry watching this episode. Everybody's stomachs were gurgling, and I was like, I could go for a snack, actually. It really just kind of hit home. And I wondered at part of it because Hyakkimaru he seemed a little bit more sluggish in this episode at first. And then I realized what was happening in the show. And I was like, oh, okay. And so at first I kind of wondered if maybe the show was demonstrating a very realistic look into, if you don't have food, you are going to be hungry and not perform as well. But there was something else going along behind the scenes, which we'll get to later on in this episode. But I do love that Hyakkimaru is holding the seeds and the bag that Mio gave him close to his heart, because it's like a big symbol there, right? And so the concept of monsters and if they are deserving of love is also something that's very relevant in this episode in terms of themes. And I feel like Hyakkimaru kind of has this revelation alongside us, the audience. And the whole episode is bookended with Dororo's idea of, let me try to make you laugh. And he tries the standard method of tickling, which does not work. And some people are ticklish and some people are not ticklish. So I get that. What's funny is at the end, when Dororo actually works to be kind, he's like, well, you bit me, spider, but I'll let you go. And that is what Hyakkimaru finds amusing. And he's like, gives a little humph chuckle. Like, that's so cute. I absolutely love that. So yeah, then we have this idea of the guy, whenever he first heard the sounds in the woods, we heard these voices saying, and the guy was like, I'm never going back to my wife. I want to stay with you forever. Oh, so, and he's like, get a room. So the question then there became, here's the question. Was she, the Spider Woman, was she in her human form when she was dilly-dallying around with this guy? Because, yeah, they're in a web, and Hyakkimaru looks up and sees her as the spider demon, and he instantly like is like, oh crap, a demon, I gotta go stop them. But for me, it seemed like he was in a web up there with her, and she was in her spider form, but the guy was laughing. So I don't know if she was in her human form and was seducing the man, and he was kind of a slime ball and is like, I'm not going back to my wife, I'll stay with you. And then she's like, oh yeah, you're kind of gross, so I'm gonna eat your life force, let's go. Or is this whole village full of monster fuckers and they're all totally down to get with Spider Woman, and he's okay with it too? I want to think that it's the former, and then he's just like just a nasty character. But it would help explain why when she meets Yajiro later, she's like, all the men that I've met have been kind of like assholes and scumbags, and she's like, you're the first nice guy that I've met. And he's like, oh, imagine that. Just that would explain a little bit more. So now the fact that she's been seducing people and turning into a human makes a lot more sense, right? Makes a lot more sense. And that was shown to us in episode 2. I don't know why for a second I was like, can they turn into humans? That one did in episode 2, and the village was, you know, manipulated by her. So JOROGUMO, the silk spider. The ED, like usually the streaming service gives me the option to watch the end credits. They did not do that this time, and I was like, how dare you? So we'll go back and see that end card at the end of the episode. But yeah, I do think that what's interesting is that they give everybody passes to be able to successfully navigate through the area. They obviously recognize Hyakkimaru and Dororo. They're not workers there. They're not laborers in the camp. And so they're like, here's your token. Now move along. And they decide to stay there for a little bit to try to like get the bounty and reward and get some more food before moving onward. But it definitely, one thing I do like about this series as well is that the setup is a little bit different. Like, for example, they give us the setup of needing the tokens to get from one place to another. Whereas, you know, the last village we just came from, Sakai and Daigo's clans were having this big tense standoff, and things weren't quite as organized as that. It was a lot more tense and kind of like, we think you're a spy, we're going to kill you. Here, they're like, oh, here's your token, go on, get on through. So I like the fact that the world building makes every place seem a little bit different, which is realistic, right? So they point out that there's been a kidnapper and that they're on the lookout for the kidnapper. By the end of the episode, it makes more sense. We find out that the kidnapper isn't the monster. It's actually Yajiro, who's like being Harriet Tubman over here and getting people across the line and away, getting the workers out of the camps. So that makes more sense now, because I was like, at the time I was thinking, if it was a monster, wouldn't they be like sending hunters out or sending like a search party or somebody to go hunting in the woods for the monster? No, because they know it's not a monster. They know it's a person. And they're going to try to catch the person when they come to the camp to save the people. So that all made more sense by the end of the episode. I was like, oh, that's why they're doing that. Again, the show doesn't come out and necessarily say it, but the symbolism and the message is there. So our poor spider lady, JOROGUMO, she gets too weak from not eating guys, and she has to turn back into her human form and try to wait and suck the lives out of all the children of Salem, like, you know, do that sort of thing. And I didn't exactly know where the story was going until the guy shows up, and it's like, okay, this guy, Yajiro, he's super nice, he's super kind, he finds her, she's a beautiful, pale woman, takes her back to his house and tries to nurse her back to health, and then ends up falling in love with her. And the thing about it is, while this whole story was unraveling, I was like, oh, this is going to end horribly. He's going to die or she's going to die. But no, the story lets them be together. And I'm like, oh, okay. Which, you know what? Kind of sucks. That the Spider Woman gets to be with the man, and Hyakkimaru's over here like waving his sword arms around like, well, I wish I could have Mio, but I guess we can't be that lucky. I do want to talk about that when we get up to Hyakkimaru and him with the Spider Woman in those moments. But I really loved Yajiro. He was such a sweet guy. It's such a shame that someone who's open-minded and considerate and nice is deemed as weird. I feel like I've watched a lot of videos where guys have talked about like the nice guy syndrome, and like a lot of people that I've watched that criticize that whole trope is that a lot of them believe that a man posing to be a nice guy expects something in return for acting that way. And that's why it's a trope, and that's why it's kind of dangerous, because they're like, well, I'm being nice, so I deserve something in return, and how dangerous and toxic that is. But what I like is that Yashiro's a nice guy, but he's expecting nothing in return. What I love about his character is he never asks for her to do anything for him, whether it's clean the house, whether it's help him get there, whether it's anything, any sexual favors. He never asks her for any of that. He makes her a cot and he makes her food, and he doesn't ask for anything in return. He's just being nice, and he doesn't expect her to give anything back to him. That's the thing. He doesn't expect any type of reciprocation. He's just being a nice person and knows that she's weak and he wants to help her. And that's so sweet. And I think that's what she's not used to. She's like, I'm used to guys being kind of assholes, and you're not that. And also like the idea of kind of self-sacrifice, where he gives her the rice, and he deals with a lot at first for Ohagi. He calls her Ohagi, which is like Ohagai. We'll ignore that. But she's kind of rude at first, where she's like, why would you eat this? As she's like shoveling it in with her hand. And then she's like, well, why'd you make this? And what is this? Like, she's kind of rude a little bit at first, but he overlooks it, which is saint behavior in itself. But then he only makes her enough to feed her. He doesn't worry about himself. And I'm like, dude, like that's really nice, but you got to keep up your strength too, so that you can help her. Like what happens later on, right? But he's like the most non-judgmental, nice guy. And as the episode went on, I figured he knew what she was. And he knew she was the spider demon. I feel like he knew what she was as the episode went on, because she was not doing a great job of hiding it. I mean, first of all, she's like, I don't know, why you would act this way, as she's eating with her hands. And he's just like, okay. But then later she's like, you're acting so weird for a human. And I'm like, it's like, red flag. But he doesn't ever question it, right? And as the episode goes on, she gets more and more like open and social with him, but she lets her guard down, and she all but admits she's a spider demon, like just in their casual conversation. And not only does he not ever judge or question her, he totally accepts it. He's like, okay, cool. It makes me believe that he probably thought something was weird from that first encounter, and he just decided to be open-minded about it and be like, let's see where this goes. She doesn't seem like she's threatening me. And the fact that she doesn't kill him in his sleep, he's like, well, she hasn't killed me yet, so let's just keep going. And then he just tries to like let the relationship go on and see what he finds out. And it's interesting. So she's like, what a strange human. Yeah. And he just like doesn't say anything to that. So then they're going along their way, and Dororo's like, we need to find some food. And that's when they go up to the village. And now it makes sense when Yajiro was looking at the sign. So the villagers all surrounded this sign, and the people in the quarry put it up asking for a reward. That's kind of the sad and sickening thing about it all, is they weren't out to try to find a monster. They were out to find a kidnapper, and they were going to just make them an example in front of the people there in the quarry. But the sad part about all it is showing how manipulative and devious humans are. Because at the end of the day, they just wanted to make an example of him to the people there and do these things that are so fiendish. And yet you have this spider demon who hasn't killed anyone. Like she says, and she lives up to it. She's like, I just kind of like suck a little life force out of them, but then they restore it the next day. She's like, and she makes such sense, because she's like, why would I kill them? She's like, if I kill them, then I'll eventually have nothing left. And also I'll draw more attention to myself than is needed, and I'll get hurt. So why would I do that? I love that she's kind of pushing this agenda of coexistence. Now granted, is her sucking the life force out of these guys consensual? Did they consent to be part of her ecosystem? Whatever, but That's a question in itself. But to her credit, she isn't a murderer. Whereas a lot of these guards, they just start firing arrows and trying to kill all of them. So it's like the concept of humanity being more of a monster than the monster itself, and the one guy trying to understand the monsters and be kind to them being labeled as a weirdo. It's a bit on the nose, but it's done very effectively here. So he's in the quarry, and then yeah, the whole thing about the guy dying in the quarry, and this guy's like, we got to get these people out of here. Sucks. It gave me very Mask of Zorro vibes. And he's like, I got to get these people out of here before everyone dies. So they hang out, and they're like, the monster only comes out once it gets really dark. Now, here's the thing. What I thought was interesting throughout this episode is the fact that Hyakkimaru can sense demons, and they're pretty close by where the demon is. But what we come to find out as the episode goes on is just like Hyakkimaru, when he's around someone that gives him a calm presence and a sense of love, the demon energy inside of him kind of gets quelled and goes down. And so I feel like throughout most of this episode, the reason why Hyakkimaru wasn't after the Spider Woman is because he didn't sense the demon energy that was in her from the start. She had calmed down and the demon energy had kind of dissipated. Because we actually see it happen later on in the episode. He's about to attack her, and then when she gets around him, when she gets around Yajiro, her energy kind of like her silhouette becomes less red and becomes more gray. And I was like, oh, so that can happen. The demons can quell the inner rage in them and demonic energy and become something else. I'm like, oh, okay. And that made me think that Hyakkimaru can hear. He can't see, but he can hear, and he can feel the spirits and souls inside vessels. But whenever Dororo and then we're talking about Dororo saying, I don't want you to become a monster, I wondered throughout this episode if Hyakkimaru was maybe putting two and two together and going, oh, so this is what happens to your soul if you're not riled up. Now, I don't know if that's true or not. Could not have been what he's getting at. But I feel like Hyakkimaru wasn't viewing the Snake Woman, or I keep calling her Snake Woman, the Spider Woman, as much of a threat, because he didn't feel like she was full of demonic energy. And also, I wonder if he's being reflective and going, you know, I was like that as well. I don't think so, though, because Biwamaru kind of made a point to Dororo saying, like, he doesn't realize that his demonic side is gaining more energy, so just keep track of him. So maybe Hyakkimaru isn't aware of that happening. It's just a funny coincidence that he could sense, despite her appearances as a spider demon, that she didn't have all this negative energy inside of her and she was actually okay. Again, I feel like once he gains his sight back, that's going to be such a disadvantage, because right now he can sense their souls and he can see how their souls change, like from her with from Yajiro and her without him. So I'm afraid that once he gains his sight back, that's going to be a little bit more difficult for him to discern. Do you look like a monster or are you actually a monster? That's going to be the hard part, right? I am glad that they do address, at least in this episode, the concept of hunger and how it does affect their drive. A lot of shows are just like, we're hungry and starving, but we can still smash a boulder over our head. And this show actually goes, no, we're not going to be as active because we need food. But yeah, this guy handled, now granted, I have had a cockroach in my house before and I have disposed of it, but I threw it outside because I'm sorry, bugs crunching, like spiders and cockroaches and beetles and stuff crunching inside a paper towel or something. Can't do it. I can't do it. I'll toss them outside and be like, best of luck. But I can't. I don't like dead animals. I don't like crunching bugs and things like that. Like, that's so disgusting. I can't do it. Nope. And I feel like she's just like, you're such a weirdo, but I like that about you. And he says, humans and bugs, they're all the same. Life is life. And at that moment, she was like, he's the one. At that moment, he said, life is life. She's like, we have the same moral compass and philosophy. Let's go. And he's like, down. So, which good for her. Good for her. Good for Ohagi to like get there. And when she came over to him in his sleep, she was going to like suck his life force out. But then she heard his stomach rumble. And she went back to her leftover food and ate it instead. And I love that scene because in that moment, she's like, who am I to take his life force when I can't even finish that rice over there that he made for me at the expense of his own hunger. Loved that. Loved that moment. That was so freaking good. Yes. So again, I feel like because she wasn't giving off all this demonic energy, Hyakkimaru and Dororo just either he didn't sense her or he sensed that she wasn't a threat and, you know, but didn't want to tell, he doesn't want to tell Dororo because maybe he's still trying to figure out if what he's thinking is right or not. And he doesn't know exactly how to express or ask that of Dororo. I don't know. Anyways, they go back. The search is still on for the kidnapper, which when we find out that people are still missing, regardless, it's like, okay, she's not the one killing them. And that leads to the conversation about her not killing people, that she leaves them alive. Because he's like, you're growing weaker and weaker. And he's like, are you, at first he's like, oh, are you dying? And then she says, well, you left. She says, do you have another job besides the quarry? And he's like, when he said a job as the moon sets, at first I was like, I thought it was going to be a twist that he was going to be a demon. And I was like, oh, is that it? Is he the monster? And they're going to go off and have monster babies together? I mean, they could. Technically. I don't know how that works. I'm not digging into the anatomy books for that one. But then it made sense that he's not a monster because otherwise Hyakkimaru would have probably sensed it from the start. But he's like, you're sick with something. She's like, I just need some food. And he's like, but this village has no doctors. You can't leave the village without a traveler's pass. So that explains why she's probably gonna have to take the arrows out of his shoulder later because there's no doctors there. So she's gonna have to treat him or take him with her to the next village or something. He's like, I could get you out of here so you can go see a doctor. When she says it seems like I won't find any young prey here, I was like, girl, you're talking about prey and humans. I think he's figured out you're not a human being anymore. Interesting. She has, I have nothing to pay you with. And then he's like, I just want you to live. And I was like, oh, girl, this guy, Yajiro, take him with you. He's down for some freaky stuff. He can cook. He wants to take care of you. And he's super nice. And he's not a troll. Go for it, girl. Go for it, Spider Woman. You can just, you know what? The moment she was like, oh, I just sucked their life force and it revitalizes itself. The look on his face, he was like, I would let you suck the life force out of me and it will come back. That was horribly dirty. Ooh. How vulgar. But yeah, no, he was all down for it at that point. He was like, yes, I am perfectly fine with this. She's going to do like a little Queen Beryl from the Negaverse and like suck a little energy out of you. But you give yourself like a day and a half. It's like donating blood. You donate some blood, donate some plasma. You'll be fine. Right as rain. Give me 48 hours. You'll be good to go. Yeah. But I kind of loved their love story. She didn't want to die. He wanted to save her. They go off together in the moonlight. She's like, you can't stay here because they know you're basically like shuffling all these people out of here in your little underground cave. She's like, you got to leave. So I love this little kind of Romeo and Juliet story. It was really, really cute. Also, I'm assuming that the leaves that Dororo and Hyakkimaru are eating are like mint leaves, maybe. Possibly some mint leaves or herbs. But they end up finding out that the village is just after Yajiro for being the kidnapper. And I honestly, a part of me at first, when they were like hesitating to attack her, wondered if this was like something to do with the 1960s cartoon and the way that it was structured or formatted. If it was, you know, kind of like a weird animation or stilted or something. But no, this is the point where I realized he's looking at her. She doesn't have the spike of demonic energy like she did before, so he doesn't view her as a threat. Because Hyakkimaru, through sensing their soul, is how he's been attacking previously. And if he doesn't sense any hazards with your soul, then you're fine. And I thought that was so interesting. I was like, oh, that's kind of cool. But yeah, I think it also reflects that maybe Hyakkimaru, after being labeled a monster or a potential monster, is now aware. I would like him to be aware that since he could become like those demons, he's got to keep himself in check as well. And maybe he's playing it close to the vest because he doesn't want to lose the seeds. Maybe he learned from the Sarlacc pit monster that he doesn't want to get too crazy because if he can't handle it, he doesn't want to put himself in danger. There's a lot of factors, but I kind of like Hyakkimaru not only putting a little bit more thought into fighting the monsters already, but also being a little bit more cautious. I think that's such a smart thing for the show to do, and I really, really like it. But yeah, and then poor Doro. Doro acts really well about this. He's like, oh, shucks, we can't get the reward. I guess we'll just let them go. That's fine. But I was really rooting for them, and I can't believe it's these stupid guards that got in the way of them being happy. And this Yajiro's like, she's sick and she's weakened. And Doro's like, well, isn't she a monster? Why would you want to protect her? And then that's when those people show up. But Yajiro's such a trooper. What an MVP. And of course, Dororo, this felt like straight out of the 1960s cartoon where Dororo was like, well, but our reward, we can give you Yajiro and the Snake Woman to get your reward. And they're like, ha ha, little boy, there was no reward at all. We were just going to kill them anyway. And Dororo was like, learned a lesson. Which I feel like Hyakkimaru knew that from the start maybe, or didn't care and just didn't want to rain on Dororo's parade. But, and it seemed like maybe Yajiro didn't want to rain on his parade as well. But he's like, that's so cruel. And they're like, if work slows down, we'll lose our heads too. So these guys, even though they're being absolute jerks, are also functioning under the guys that they're being targeted as well. It's like just up, down, trickle down cruelty going on in this as they're trying to just make sure that their heads are saved by scapegoating her and Yajiro, whether they're the ones responsible or not. But man, I did feel sorry for the Spider Woman because she was just getting them out of the way, and Hyakkimaru thought that she was trying to kill them, and Yajiro was like, well, wait, don't hurt them, and then he ends up getting, like, the arrows in his shoulder, which, Jesus, why? And then that's when Hyakkimaru realizes that she didn't kill any of them. If Yajiro hadn't been there, I mean, she would have been dead, but I also like that the cave that they're going to sneak out through, I know that the little rope with the talismans on it is probably very inconspicuous and not easily noticeable, but it looks really noticeable. In the episode, I'm like, oh, I can't imagine where the secret entrance is. Maybe where this giant rope and talismans are, but to be fair, it may be one of those things where unless you get really close, you wouldn't know what it was. Who knows? But yeah, then they decide to go off together, and he's like, well, here you go. You know, that you won't need a light, they'll never catch you. And she's like, you're coming with me. And he's like, what? And she's like, your house is shit. You just had like a bowl for some rice. That's the only collateral you had. And then she's like, you know, you can't stay here. They'll probably burn your house down. So you need to come with me. And he was instantly like, it took 2 seconds. He was like, okay. Good for him. Good for both of them. They deserve each other in the best way possible. It just sucks that they get their happy ending. And meanwhile, Hyakkimaru's over here waving his sword arms like, well, I guess I can't have love, so. Oh, it's so sad. But yeah, then we have the fight. And again, Hyakkimaru sees her becoming the spider demon. I think I wanted to call her Snake just because of the heavy woman from episode 2. But yeah, this guy was okay with her even when she turned into a snake force. And even though she like spun them all into little spider cocoons, she didn't eat any of them or kill any of them. So yeah, she's like, there's no doctor here, right? So she's like, I'm not going to let you die. And Dororo's like, oh, wow, a monster being in love with a human? But again, the parallels to Hyakkimaru and Mio, right? They're right there. And then when she says one of us is going to have to die, Yajiro's like, no, don't kill. You said that you wouldn't. It's like, you never have and you never will, right? Again, if Yajiro hadn't been there, I think Hyakkimaru would have killed her. But that's when she, like, goes over to him and, like, does she like, went over to him. Did she make out with him in her spider form? Did she do that? Did she? And Hyakkimaru's like, I can't judge them. I'm like, did she make out with him? Right there and then? Okay. Dororo's like, this story. All right. Yeah. And then they're all just like rustling around like little grubs, the guys that are all wrapped up. So yeah, so they managed to escape, the two of them, saying they're gone now. A ghoul that likes a human, huh? The world's full of surprises. But he's like, it's a good thing you could hear back then. I feel like Hyakkimaru knowing what he knows now, has a little bit of better appreciation for that kind of situation now that he sort of understands. Maybe he's understanding where some of the demons are coming from. Who knows? I like Dororo's like, man, it's a good thing you could hear back then, because that could have ended in an awkward way. We could have killed two people that were madly in love that hadn't really hurt anybody. Dororo, quit hitting it on the head. Honestly, what? But yeah, but then the spider, he's like, you still don't want to speak? He's like, I'll talk enough for the two of us and cheer things up. And that's when the spider, like, gets in his face, and he's like, oh. And he's like, it bit me. And I like that the spider was just hanging there, and he goes down to smack the spider, but then he stops. And it's kind of like one of those little lessons for the story. Like if nobody's doing violence to you, don't just do violence. Like, think about why you're doing the thing that you're doing. Like, why are you fighting back? Did the thing you're fighting back attack you first? And then, you know, just let it go and be like, oh, I'm sorry. Because honestly, he ran into the spider. The spider was freaked out and bit him because it was scared. And then he was going to smash it, but there was no reason to. It was kind of his fault. So I like they give us like this little teachable moment in there. And then at the very end, we see Hyakkimaru kind of like just chuckle. And he's like, you laughed at me. If all that Hyakkimaru does is laugh at him throughout the series, I'll be fine with that. So then, yeah, we get JOROGUMO, which is the Spider Woman. Good for her. Her and Yajiro, good for them. Good for them. But yeah, what a nice, straightforward episode that was really surprisingly sweet. Had some scarier elements and some darkness in it. But overall, it felt like a nice palate cleanser after the last two episodes, and to show us that Hyakkimaru is growing up a little bit, and Dororo is becoming acquainted with that as well. So nice. Now, I know this series has 24 episodes, so the rule of 8 may not apply to this series, which is fine, but 8's my lucky number. So I'm really excited for episode 8 next week just to see what it is. So anyway, I'm super excited as well to hear your thoughts down below, but I hope you all have a wonderful week. Please stay safe, take care, and yeah, I'll be back really soon with episode 8 of Dororo. Bye!